Hi, from Chicago, this is Bruce DuMont with our Beyond the Beltway analysis of national politics, featuring occasional injections of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by our panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public servants, professors, and most importantly, plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast.
I started this program in June of 1980. And for many years it was called Inside Politics. It was a local show on WBEZ. And in 1989, the show went national, also on primarily public radio stations. In 1992, I switched the program to WLS, which is commercial radio. And in 1994, we changed the title from Inside Politics to Beyond the Beltway, because we were national and we were offering it beyond the Beltway perspective as opposed to an inside the Beltway perspective, and that's how the show changed its name. It is my belief that not all political wisdom rests on the banks of the Potomac River. That's the philosophy of the show, is that there are people that live outside the Beltway that literally have, they're intelligent, they have strong opinions, they're very articulate, and those were the people that really never had a voice in determining national politics or even discussing national politics. For many years it was very insular, and you maybe have had the same 16 people. They would travel from one show to the other. There was no diversity of thought. There was no similarity of what their lives were like every day. So they really didn't know what was going on beyond the Beltway, and in many cases the national pundits, that's why they miss so much of what's happening in America. They miss the Donald Trump phenomenon because they're not out talking with real people with real passion.
We also were observing what Donald Trump was saying inside. And again, you referenced a few moments ago, Rick, Kate Steinle, who was the young woman who was killed by an illegal immigrant. And that got a lot of massive coverage, and it happened literally less than a month after Donald Trump announced his campaign, in which he denounced some Mexicans that were coming to the countries as rapists and murderers. Not all, but some. And so we were listening. All this was happening, within our earshot and within our experience. And this is what Donald Trump was saying to the nearly 31,000 people that were in the amphitheater. This is how he began his remarks that night in Costa Mesa, California, last Thursday night. As he began to talk, people came out who had been victims.
We've seen major news programs solicit user feedback through Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, platforms like that. Would you say that news has become more open to the public, or the news programs become more open to the public, or have they become more insular since when you began Beyond the Beltway?
No, I think the programs have changed significantly. One thing where they've not changed is the 16 voices that you used to hear. Maybe those voices are 23 or 35 right now. It's still a small group of people. Once you get on the list of the producers list, the bookers list, you get invited to a lot of shows doing a lot of things. But I think the advent of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and the new technologies, it is really democratized reporting. So people can, if they've got a cell phone, they can be on the air. They can be doing live feeds on Facebook now. And so that has made, I think, politics really much more expansive than it used to be, which I think is very good. The more people who have the access to the media, the better, in my opinion.
How have you seen Beyond the Beltway expand?
I think the significant change is that more people know more about politics than they did 15, 20 years ago. When this program began, I had a regular guest. He was a lobbyist for a Fortune 500 company. He subscribed to a newsletter called The Hotline. And they spent probably $600 or $700, $800 a year to get it. And that went to all the lobbyists. So they knew what was going on in Washington every single day. And every Thursday afternoon, he would get his daily or his weekly hotline report. It came out every Thursday, just once a week. It's a fact, it was sent out by fax. So he would get it around 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. He would come on Beyond or Inside Politics at the time, at 6:30 that night, and we would be talking about what was going on. And he was telling my audience all the big things that were in this newsletter. But if you were not a lobbyist and you weren't paying $800 or $900 a year for your fax, you didn't know any of that information. It was really inside stuff. So that's the nature of inside politics began then when we began to have members of Congress on and people in the Chicagoland area. They began to tell sort of schools out of tail, and they were telling people things that they really didn't know that had not been made public yet. So that's how the program evolved. Well, now, I mean, what used to be called the hotline, well, now is Politico. I mean, there's so many different sources on the internet with websites where you can go and get inside political information. It's pretty hard to be inside anymore. My favorite moment was the 1996 Republican convention in San Diego. I had booked in advance. We did the program from a hotel terrace in San Diego, and it was fed nationally, and at that particular time, the program was then recorded, and it played on a San Diego station a little bit later on that night. It played on a tape delay. But we were live everywhere else. And I had Henry Hyde, who was one of the leading members of Congress at the time, and I had Donald Rumsfeld, who was the manager of the Bob Dole presidential campaign. Bob Dole was the presidential nominee. I had Senator John McCain was a guest on the show, and I had Eleanor Clift, who was a Washington bureau chief for Newsweek magazine. So I had a really great list of people. And Henry Hyde, who I knew for many years, he arrived to the program early. And it was really hot. It was about 95 degrees out. So I said, Henry, why don't you go inside the hotel here and wait? It's air conditioned, and I'll come get you right before the show starts. And he was only about 20 yards away, but he was looking at our setup within a sliding door. And I went in there about 5 minutes before the broadcast, and Henry Hyde is there, and 20 feet from him is Bob Dole, the hottest man in American politics. He had just landed in San Diego. He was talking with someone else in the other part of the room, and Henry Hyde said, "Would you like to meet Bob Dole?" I said, "Yes." He takes me over to Bob Dole. He introduces him to me. I have to make a real quick pitch. I said, "Bruce DuMont, Beyond the Beltway." I said, "I'm about to go on the air live. Would you be willing to be my guest?" He said, "Well, I've got a conversation here." He said, "But I could be over there in 15 minutes. And I said, "It's right out there." And I pointed out the window, and you could see where we were all set up. He said, "Okay, I'll be there." So we go on the air, and as I'm going to my first commercial break, I see Bob Dole walking behind the cameras and behind everything else, followed by Secret Service, followed by at least 35 camera crews following Bob Dole as he walked around. And during the commercial break, he walked right in and he sat down on the set of Beyond the Beltway. So I had him on, I had John McCain on, I had Don Rumsfeld on, I had Henry Hyde on, and that was probably the greatest show we ever did, when the hottest man in American politics walked in as a surprise guest on Beyond the Beltway in 1996.